Once a Venetian fortress, later transformed into a leper colony, has witnessed centuries of tales.
The first group of 251 patients with leprosy was deported to the 4th or 13th of October in 1904.
Despite its somber history, Spinalonga remains a symbol of survival, community, and human dignity.
Off the northeast coast of Crete, where the sea glimmers like polished glass, there lies a speck of land wrapped in time, an island not just shaped by the tides, but by exile, fortresses, and forgotten names. Its walls have seen empires rise and fall. This is Spinalonga, a fortress, a prison, a memory. Spinalonga's story begins in the wake of a collapsing empire. When Constantinople fell to the Fourth Crusade in 1204, Crete was swept into the hands of the Venetians, and with it the small rocky islet of Spinalonga. By the late 16th century, the Venetians had reason to fear. The Ottoman navy loomed in the east, and the Mediterranean was no longer safe. Between 1579 and 1586, they transformed Spinalonga into an impregnable sea fortress. Massive bastions, thick ramparts, cannon-lined walls, all carved into the rock. The island became a floating citadel, a Venetian shield against Ottoman aggression, and for a time, it worked. Even as much of Crete fell, Spinalonga held firm, remaining under Venetian control. For more than 4 decades after the Ottomans captured the mainland, it became a hub for merchants, soldiers, traders, a miniature stronghold with its own rhythm of life. But in 1715, the inevitable came. The Ottoman Empire seized Spinalonga, marking the end of Venetian rule. Still, the island was far from done. It would wear many faces in the centuries to come, and none more haunting than what came next. When the Ottomans took Spinalonga in 1715, the island's purpose began to shift. The warships were gone. No longer just a fortress, Spinalonga became a refuge. A thriving Muslim community took root among the Venetian ruins. Here, within the bastions of a once Venetian stronghold, families were raised. Children ran along the battlements. Merchants traded in the central path. Fishermen cast their nets into the Gulf of Alaunda. The walls, once built to keep enemies out, now sheltered a new way of life. But beyond the island, the world was changing fast. By the end of the 19th century, Crete was no longer purely Ottoman. Rebellion, independence, shifting power, waves swept through Greece, and Spinalonga, so small, so seemingly forgotten, would soon be caught in a tragedy. One that had nothing to do with flags or borders, because just across the waters, a crisis was growing. Leprosy, feared, misunderstood, spreading, and someone had to decide where to put the sick. Spinalonga's walls, so good at keeping people out, would now be used to keep people in. By 1903, Spinalonga's name would change forever. That year, the island was designated a leper colony, a place to isolate those suffering from Hansen's disease, feared more than understood. Boats arrived quietly, carrying men and women, marked not by choice, but by diagnosis, exiled, with no warning, no return, and yet they began to build a life. Behind the walls, the sick planted flowers. They opened shops. They even held weddings. There was a school, a bakery, and most importantly, the Church of St. Pantaleimon, where they sought comfort amid despair. Yes, conditions were harsh, but Spinalonga's lepers refused to vanish. They forged a defiant society on the very edge of existence. The main street, once a Venetian military corridor, became a place of conversation, barter, and hope. Each tunnel, each alley, echoed with the will to live. They were forgotten by the world, but not by each other. For over 5 decades, Spinalonga became a paradox, an island of the isolated filled with life. And though many came here never to leave, they built something that endured long after their suffering faded into the stone. Behind Spinalonga's massive stone walls, once built for war, a new kind of life emerged. A community of outcasts stitched together by survival. Though isolated by disease, the lepers refused to live only in despair. They formed a self-sufficient society. In time, Conditions improved, doctors arrived, basic medical care was introduced, and a school opened for the children of patients and workers. Still, hardships remained: isolation, pain, stigma, the ever-present weight of being unwanted by the world. But even here, love bloomed. Some married, others gave birth, and in the heart of it all stood the Church of St. Pantaleimon, where many sought comfort and connection beyond the walls. The main street, lined with simple stone houses, became the spine of the colony, busy during the day, hauntingly quiet at dusk. And yet, Spinalonga was not without dignity. Though they were sent here to disappear, the residents lived with a quiet defiance. They painted walls, they grew flowers, they named their homes. They were not numbers, they were human, carrying on in the shadow of an illness that took everything except their will to live. For decades, Spinalonga existed as a world apart, a place frozen in time, untouched by medical progress beyond its shores. But then came the 1950s, a breakthrough, a cure for leprosy, no longer a lifelong sentence. Hansen's disease could now be treated, managed, controlled. By 1957, the government made the decision: the colony would be closed. Patients were transferred off the island. The once crowded alleys fell silent, doors shut for the final time. Homes were abandoned just as they were, curtains swaying. In the sea breeze, it was as if the island itself exhaled and went still. By 1962, Spinalonga was entirely abandoned. But the silence wasn't total. The story lingered. The pain, the resilience, the daily acts of survival, they clung to the stones. They whispered down corridors. They remained etched into the paths where hundreds once walked. Spinalonga, once a fortress, then a prison, now a memory with walls. Not just a place, but a legacy. And the world outside finally began to look back. After the last boats departed and the gates were locked, Spinalonga stood alone, battered by salt winds and memory. From 1962 onward, the island was left untouched. Its houses are collapsing slowly under the weight of time. No footsteps echoed in its narrow streets. The stone walls, once filled with voices and routine, now only held silence. For decades, nature began to reclaim Spinalonga. Only the sea kept moving, lapping against the rocks as it always had. Locals in Ilaunda and Plaka, the villages nearby, could still see the island on the horizon, but few spoke of it. For some, it was a place of sorrow, too painful to visit, too recent to forget. For others, it was simply left behind. A chapter closed, an island erased. But Spinalonga's story wasn't over. Though partially accessible in the early 2000s, Spinalonga was officially reopened to the public in 2010. With preservation efforts underway, paths were cleared, walls were stabilized. The goal was not to erase the past, but to preserve its truth. Today, visitors walk among ruins with quiet reverence. The silence remains, but it's no longer abandonment, it's remembrance. Spinalonga became not just a ghost of a colony, but a monument to endurance, to healing, to the human spirit. Today, Spinalonga is not just a ruin, it is a walk through memory. Visitors arrive by boat from Ilaunda or Plaka, stepping onto the same shore once touched by Venetian soldiers, Ottoman settlers, and exiled lepers. The first thing they meet is the entry tunnel, once a passage of fear, now a portal into the past. As you walk the main path, the remnants of daily life reveal themselves. Stone homes, some roofless, some intact, stand silent. A canteen and a small cafe now serve visitors, standing where ration lines once formed. The Church of St. Pantaleimon still watches over the island, modest but dignified, a sanctuary then and now. The leper cemetery, tucked behind low stone walls, is not marked by grandeur, but by stillness. It is one of the most moving stops on the island. Photography enthusiasts capture the interplay of stone and sea, shadow and light. Spinalonga no longer hides in shame. It invites understanding. It offers lessons. And as you walk the old paths, past the homes of people history once tried to forget, you realize something profound. They are not forgotten. Spinalonga was silent for decades, but today, it speaks again. It speaks through crumbling walls, through salt-stained windows of abandoned homes, through the stories now told by guides and signs. The island has become one of Crete's most visited sites, welcoming thousands of travelers each year, not only for its views, but for its voice. The 2010 novel The Island by Victoria Hislop brought global attention to Spinalonga's past. Later adapted into a Greek television drama, filmed on location, breathing life into the colony's story for a new generation. Spinalonga is a symbol in modern Greece, a reminder of how far medical science has come. Today, conservation efforts continue across the island. There is no amusement here. Despite its rising visitor numbers, the site remains protected, a balance of memory and modern attention. Standing on the ramparts, looking out over the Gulf of Alaunda, visitors don't just see ruins, they witness echoes of humanity that refuse to disappear. Spinalonga is no longer a forgotten island. It is a voice reclaimed, a story retold, and a place that speaks not just of death, but of life after silence. Spinalonga was never meant to outlast time, and yet here it stands. Once a fortress of fear, then a prison of disease. Today, the island has become something entirely different, a monument to endurance, a canvas of layered history, a mirror held up to the soul of humanity. Its tunnels no longer echo with exile, but the silence remains, not as emptiness, but as reverence. The ruins of homes do not beg for sympathy. They offer perspective on suffering, on dignity, on the will to live with purpose, even when the world turns away. As boats carry visitors back across the sea, many leave in quiet reflection, not just from what they saw, but from what they felt. A strange peace, a weight, a whisper that history lives not in books, but in stones, scars, and voices long buried. Spinalonga does not shout. It whispers still. And in that whisper is a promise that we remember, that we learn, that we do not look away from the hard chapters of our past, but walk through them with care. Because the true story of Spinalonga was never just about isolation. It was always about returning.